so sorry. That amazing man lost his life because of me. And if I could take it back, if this would change it, I would have done it a long time ago.
Does taking a life for a life truly bring justice, or does it only deepen the cycle of violence? That's one of the biggest debates surrounding the death penalty to this day. Some argue it's fair, a necessary consequence. Others believe true punishment is a lifetime behind bars, forced to confront the weight of one's actions day after day until death comes naturally. There's no clear answer, and maybe there never will be. Both sides have their points. Prison, after all, is supposed to be about reform, isn't it? At least that's the idea. For one Georgia woman, Kelly Gissendaner, death row became the setting for a profound transformation, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Convicted for orchestrating the murder of her husband, Kelly wasn't the same woman at the end of her journey as she was when she first entered prison. And isn't that the goal? Growth, change, redemption? Fellow inmates credit her with saving their own lives. She found faith. She offered others hope. Her own children even forgave her. Even Pope Francis intervened, pleading for her life to be spared. But the system didn't offer her that same grace. Despite her transformation, despite not being the one to physically carry out the killing, Kelly Gissendaner was sentenced to die by lethal injection. A rare outcome, especially for someone who didn't personally commit the act of murder or pull the trigger. We reward good behavior in prison. We believe people can change. We offer parole to those who prove it. So why doesn't that possibility extend to those on death row? Yes, taking a life is a grave, unforgivable act to many, but when a person serves their time, when they change, when they seek redemption, when they admit their mistakes, is execution still justice? Some would say absolutely, others not so much. For Kelly Gissendaner, it didn't matter. She was the first woman executed by lethal injection in the state of Georgia and the first woman executed in the state since 1945. Many believe Kelly's death should have never even happened. Because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Kelly Renee Brookshire was born on March 8, 1968 in rural Lawrenceville, Georgia. Her parents, Maxine and Larry, had a tumultuous relationship, to say the least, filled with booze, wild parties, and constant fighting. And not just arguments either, real, violent, physical fights. Kelly also had a younger brother named Shane who was just 1 year younger than her. And from the beginning, life for her was hard. Some would even say cursed. Kelly was born into poverty, raised by a family that worked the cotton fields just to survive. But the struggle wasn't only financial. Kelly endured more than most kids should ever have to growing up. Her parents' marriage didn't last long. After 4 chaotic years together, they ended up splitting. Maxine had been cheating the entire time, and within a week of the divorce, she ended up marrying the man she had been seeing behind her ex-husband's Larry back, Billy Wade. Maybe she hoped that this time things would be different, that her marriage would be different, but it wasn't. In fact, things only got worse. Billy Wade turned out to be even more abusive than her first husband, and their home eventually became a battleground of alcohol, rage, and violence. He would beat Maxine quite regularly, but the abuse didn't just stop with her. Billy would also take his anger out on Kelly too. He started hurting her when she was just a little girl, hitting her, choking her, even molesting her. Sometimes Maxine even joined in. She'd beat Kelly with belts, fly swatters, honestly, whatever she could grab her hands onto, or even just using her bare hands. And it wasn't just the bruises. The emotional abuse cut just as deep. Kelly was told again and again that she was ugly, stupid, unlovable, worthless. That kind of pain doesn't just go away, especially not when you're a young child. It sits inside you. And for Kelly, there was no escape. This life, the pain, the violence, and the silence was all she had ever known. When she was just 10 years old, Kelly tried to find hope again. She reunited with her biological father, Larry, and she wanted so badly for him to be the dad that she always needed and wanted. Someone to just love her, protect her, see her. But that reunion, unfortunately, didn't go how she imagined. Larry had moved on by this point, remarried, and had a brand new daughter of his own. He didn't want anything to do with his old life, including Kelly. So that little bit of hope that she had, well, it quickly slipped away, just like that. And school didn't bring any comfort either. Kelly couldn't concentrate. She struggled with her grades, and every failure only reinforced the lies and the ideas that she had been told at home, that she was stupid, that she'd never be good enough. Things seemed like they might finally change, however, when Maxine eventually divorced Billy Wade just before Kelly started high school. And with the abuse behind them, Maxine packed up the kids and moved to a new town, Winder, Georgia, a small town in Barrow County, just east of Atlanta. It felt like a chance at a fresh start, but when you've only ever known pain, even hope feels like a complete stranger. When Kelly moved to a brand new town, she had hoped for, a fresh start like anybody would. A new school meant a chance to be someone else, reinvent herself, maybe make new friends, have the opportunity to be a regular teenager, finally feel normal. But unfortunately, it didn't exactly turn out that way. Winder was a small town where everyone knew each other. The kids had grown up together, they shared their childhoods together, and by this point had built very tight circles. And then there was Kelly, tall, the new kid, unfamiliar. At 6 feet tall, she stood out in every single way. And no matter how much she hoped to blend in, she simply just couldn't. She felt like an outsider, once again, just like she always had been before. And school was already tough. She didn't connect with other kids quite easily, and many of her classmates bullied her. They labeled her as trailer trash, mocked her for her background, and made sure she never forgot that she didn't belong there. Her home life had always been hard, and school offered no escape from that. At home, her mother, Maxine, kept very tight control over Kelly's life. She wasn't allowed to have any friends over, she wasn't allowed to date, and even if she had any close friends to begin with, Maxine's rules would have kept them away anyway. Kelly also had to work to help support the family, so she took a job at the drive-through window of her local McDonald's. She was just a teenager, but already juggling so many responsibilities far beyond her years. And behind closed doors, Kelly had been hurt by people who were supposed to protect her. One person in particular. In her senior year, she experienced a traumatic event at the hands of someone who she trusted. She was date raped by a boy who she knew, and as a result, she became pregnant. That moment, like so many others in her life, left deep emotional scars, wounds. But as always, Kelly carried on because she didn't know any other way. It seemed like life just never let up. When pain is all you've ever known, how can anyone expect you to rise above it completely on your own, unscathed? And when no one has ever shown you true love, true unconditional love, it's hard to believe that you even deserve it. Kelly's life felt like a storm that never fully cleared. And Kelly had hid her pregnancy for months, but by her 6th month, it became quite obvious. People at school noticed, and the teasing and the name-calling just got worse. But then something unexpected happened. Her biological father, Larry, the man that she had longed to know all these years, reached out after hearing that she was expecting. And this time, he actually stayed. The two reconnected, and together they decided her baby boy would carry the Brookshire name. Then, in June 1986, just 2 weeks after Kelly graduated from high school, she gave birth to her son, Brandon Brookshire. And for the first time in her life, something actually felt steady for once. Real. Like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. Things felt like they were finally looking up for her. And then, just a few months after giving birth to her son Brandon, Kelly began dating a boy that she had known from high school, Jeff Banks. Things moved quickly for the two of them, and then by 1987, when Kelly was only 19 years old, the two got married. To Kelly, this felt like her fairy tale, her second chance. After everything that she had been through up to this point, the chaos, the loneliness, the broken home, she thought she finally had the perfect little family that she had always dreamed of. Finally, a stable life, a real future, and she was excited to give Brandon, her son, the kind of upbringing that she never had herself. But unfortunately, that hope didn't last long. Their marriage actually only lasted 6 months, and it ended abruptly after a very strange and violent outburst, reportedly sparked when Kelly's father, Larry, actually pulled a gun on Jeff during a family dinner, all because Jeff supposedly failed to pass him the bread. But that was it for Jeff. Enough was enough, so he left. Just like that, Kelly was alone once again. Back to square one. She then moved back in with her mother, and by this point, she was now a 19-year-old single mom with a baby and no clear path forward with her life. And Kelly's troubles were far from over. Over the next few months, she was arrested for shoplifting, she was physically assaulted by her father, and she just couldn't hold down a job. And just like her parents before her, she also began turning to alcohol to numb her. The cycle of trauma, abuse, and survival continued. A web spun long before she was ever born. Then, about a year later, Kelly met someone who would change the course of her life forever, for better and for worse. Doug Gissendaner. Doug was born in December 1966 in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was the oldest of 3 children and was actually the only boy in his family. His parents, Doug Sr. and Sue, were by all accounts loving and supportive. Doug's upbringing couldn't have been more different from Kelly's. His was the kind of family you'd see in a picture frame. Stable, tight-knit, all-American. But Doug, just like everyone else, had his own struggles. He had a hard time in school as well and was eventually diagnosed with dyslexia. His siblings thrived academically, but Doug felt left behind. And college just wasn't in the cards for him, even though his parents really hoped that it would be. So after graduating in 1985, Doug chose to go straight into work, something he knew that he was good at, something that actually made sense to him. Doug and Kelly met through a mutual friend in March of 1989. And just like that, with her first marriage, things moved quite fast. Sparks immediately flew. There was immediate chemistry, attraction. Something was just magnetic between the both of them. And then within 6 months, by September 1989, they were married. History, it seemed, was repeating itself. Doug even bonded quickly with Brandon, Kelly's son. And it felt like this time, again, things might be different. At first, Doug's parents were worried though. They worried the relationship was just moving way too fast. But once they found out that Kelly was already 4 months pregnant on her wedding day, they realized that this wasn't going to be a temporary thing. Kelly was now going to be a permanent part of their family. But like all of Kelly's relationships before, the fairy tale began to unravel quite quickly. Not long after their wedding, both Doug and Kelly lost their jobs. Then, with nowhere else to go, they moved in with Kelly's mother, and the stress just began to mount. Unemployment, a second baby on the way, financial pressure, it was just all adding up. And with that pressure came tension, arguments, and fights. And Doug wasn't used to that. He'd grown up in a home where people didn't scream at each other, where problems were handled actually with calm conversations, not shouting matches, not confrontation. But Kelly, she only knew chaos. She only knew confrontation. That was the language of her childhood, of her upbringing. So when things got tough, she fought loudly and emotionally. And Doug didn't know how to respond. So he withdrew, and the emotional gap between them began to grow. But Doug, being the level-headed, responsible man that he was, knew that he had to step up. He was now a husband and an expecting father. He was also a stepfather to Brandon, and he knew it was time to provide. So just before Kelly gave birth to their first child together, Doug ended up enlisting in the Army. Sure, the timing wasn't ideal, but the Army came with a steady paycheck, solid benefits, and a chance to support his ever-growing family. To Doug, it felt like the best move at the time, and that's where he actually thrived. Unlike Kelly, Doug made friends easily. His superiors respected him. He had a reputation for being dependable, the kind of soldier who did what needed to be done without complaint. No one had a bad word to say about Doug. And he sent money home regularly, thinking he was taking care of his wife and kids. But back in Georgia, things were actually different. Kelly wasn't exactly using that money to keep the family afloat, and bills started to pile up. At one point, the couple's car was nearly repossessed, and it was actually Doug's parents who had to step in to pay off the notes and keep things from falling apart completely. Then, in August 1990, Kelly gave birth to their daughter, Kayla. But Doug wasn't there for the birth. He was stationed in Germany, and a month later, Kelly and the kids actually joined him overseas, trying to piece together the picture of a happy family. But that image cracked fast. Maybe it was the stress, maybe it was the distance, but maybe it was just Kelly being who she had become after years and years of trauma and instability. While Doug was away on military assignments, sometimes gone for days or even weeks at a time, Kelly was reportedly out partying. People said she was seeing other men, cheating on Doug. Eventually, she packed up the kids and returned back to Georgia while Doug finished his Army service. Doug came home for good in October 1991. He hoped that the two could hit reset, rebuild their marriage, start fresh. But that foundation had already been broken. And then just 1 month after Doug returned home, Kelly told him that she actually wanted to join the Army herself. She wanted her turn to serve. And that's when Doug realized their relationship was over, that their marriage had run its course. The two separated immediately and finalized their divorce in May 1993. Doug's parents, well, they were relieved. They had never liked Kelly, not from the beginning. They saw what she had put their son Doug through. They saw the chaos, they saw the stress, all the emotional weight and baggage. And when the divorce papers were signed, they finally felt like their son could breathe again, find a new life again. But unbeknownst to them, or even to Doug and Kelly themselves, their story wasn't finished quite yet. It's still unclear why Kelly decided to enlist in the Army in the first place. Maybe she wanted to serve her country, maybe she just needed a paycheck. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a way to put distance between herself and Doug. A break from her past, a break from her family. Whatever her reasons were, one thing was obvious. Her experience in the Army was nothing like Doug's, and she hated it. Kelly struggled to adapt to the structure, to the discipline, all the demands. It was way too much for her, and she thought the only way out was to get pregnant again. Technically, she was divorced by then, so it wasn't cheating. She then got what she wanted, a discharge. And shortly after, she found out she was pregnant. So she moved back home to Georgia and into her mother's house. Just a few months later, though, Kelly gave birth to another baby boy, this time named Jonathan Dakota, who she nicknamed Cody. The identity of Cody's father still to this day remains somewhat unclear, though it's known he was also a soldier Kelly had met while she was enlisted. But sadly, he passed away from cancer just months before their baby was born. And once Kelly was back in Georgia, her pattern, her cycle began again. A cycle she could never quite seem to escape. She started hopping from job to job, dating various men, chasing something steady, but never quite finding it. Eventually, she got a job at the International Readers League of Atlanta, where she struck up a fast friendship with her boss, Belinda Owens. And the two became close, not just co-workers, but actually best friends. And they spent a lot of time together. And it wasn't long before Belinda introduced Kelly to her brother, Greg Owen. There was an immediate spark between Kelly and Greg. and the two clicked quickly and became inseparable. At first, everything seemed perfect. That exciting honeymoon phase, new love, new possibilities, but like most of Kelly's prior relationships, it didn't last. The fight started, Kelly's temper flared, she threw tantrums, she screamed, she picked fights with Greg the way she had with others before him. And Belinda, who once thought the world of Kelly, began to regret ever introducing the two of them. She hated the way Kelly had treated her brother, how she had bossed him around, how she controlled him. So when the relationship finally ended, Belinda was relieved, just like Doug's family had been. Then, like clockwork, Doug and Kelly rekindled their relationship, much to Doug's parents' dismay. They had never approved of Kelly, remember, and after spending thousands bailing Doug out of the financial mess from their first marriage, they refused to help when he asked for money to buy a house for him and his family, Kelly's family. But Doug wouldn't be swayed. In May 1995, the two remarried. Doug, Kelly, their daughter, and her two sons became a family once again. And Doug treated the boys like his own. He wanted so badly to make it work this time. But again, just 4 months later, the two separated. Kelly went back to Greg. Again, the same pattern, the same chaos. It's unclear if Kelly was drawn to the dysfunction or just didn't know anything else. After all, it was the only kind of love that she had ever seen growing up. And Doug, maybe it was his deep desire to build a real family, or maybe he just loved her that much. But either way, by early 1996, Kelly had convinced him to try one more time. Third time's the charm. Or so they hoped. This time, though, they both pledged to make it work, not just for themselves, but for the kids. Doug took out a high-interest loan, and the couple bought a small ranch house on Meadow Trace Drive in Auburn, Georgia. He dove into the suburban dad life, yard work, house projects, playing with the kids, being a father. He was determined to give them the love and the structure that he had grown up with. But Kelly, while Doug built stability, she kept seeing Greg on the side. And that fragile sense of stability would completely shatter by February 1997. Doug and Kelly actually had only lived in their new home for about 3 months when one night, Doug simply vanished. On February 7th, Kelly dropped the kids off at her mother's so she could go out with a couple of friends. Doug was at a friend's house as well, but he was working on a car. It was a rare night where both parents had a little bit of time to themselves. And around 10 p.m., Doug reportedly left his friend's house, heading home. Kelly, after a night of dancing at a club, told her friends that she was also calling it an early night too, but not before saying something strange. She had a bad feeling, like something terrible was going to happen. Was it a gut feeling, a warning, or did she know more than she let on? She arrived home and went straight to bed. But by that morning, Doug still wasn't home, and this wasn't like him. So she called his parents and friends, but no one had seen or heard from him. By the afternoon the next day, February 8th, she reported him missing, and police immediately jumped into action. They interviewed friends, family, and retraced the route that Doug would have taken that night. Kelly told investigators their marriage was problem-free, a happy, stable home.
He does not drink, he does not do drugs, he's very family-oriented. If he's not with me, he's with his kids.
Kelly Gissendaner sits in a crowded living room among friends, telling us she knows no reason why anyone would want to hurt her husband, 30-year-old Douglas Gissendaner. The last time she talked with him was Friday. He was leaving a party around 10 o'clock in the evening and heading home, but he never made it. Police say his car was found Saturday in a northeastern part of Gwinnett County, torched. There was no sign of Gissendaner.
We've also done an aerial search using our infrared with the helicopter, and that's been to no avail. Possibly tomorrow at some point, we'll have uniformed officers as well as detectives. We'll go to the area where the vehicle was located and probably do a grid search of the area where we can try to turn up anything that would help us in locating him.
Friends and family have been working tirelessly, they tell me, since learning that Doug Gissendaner has been missing. They've been posting flyers in cars and every place they can possibly put one up. They posted more than 500 in Fulton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett County.
We know there's foul play, and we didn't think that he was on a main road,
So we went down back roads, we went through woods, we went through dirt roads.
Everyone in the neighborhood describes Gissendaner as a church-going family man who ran a small business making shocks for stock cars.
We need to know where he is, what's happened. For Kelly and her kids, we need to find him.
What's your hope?
I'm hoping he'll walk in this door, or at least pick up the phone and call.
Let's,
But Doug's family and friends told a completely different story. They talked about the infidelity. They talked about the couple's constant bickering. And one name kept coming up over and over: Greg Owen. Just days into the investigation, Doug's car was found, abandoned on a remote dirt road in Gwinnett County, burned from the inside out. That same day, family and friends gathered at Doug's parents' home, heartbroken and confused. Kelly stopped by briefly, then took the kids to the circus. She also returned to work just days later. Her behavior struck many as cold, unsettling, not the actions of a grieving wife. But still, there was one sliver of hope. Doug's body wasn't in the car. Maybe he was still alive. Maybe he was just hurt somewhere, waiting to be found. But 12 days after he went missing, that hope was crushed. A mile from where the car was found, investigators discovered what looked like a pile of trash in the woods. But it wasn't trash. It was Doug's body, and he was dead. His body was found on his knees, bent at the waist, forehead in the dirt. Animals had already begun scavenging, and his face was almost unrecognizable. Only dental records confirmed that it indeed was him. The autopsy revealed he had been stabbed 4 times in the scalp, neck, and shoulder. It was no accident. Doug had been murdered, but by who and why? At Doug's funeral, Kelly showed up over an hour late, not because of traffic or grief, but because she had stopped for breakfast at a Cracker Barrel nearby. Her behavior, again, didn't match that of a grieving widow, raising more red flags among friends and family. As police shifted the investigation toward murder, 2 names stuck out to them almost immediately: Kelly and Greg. In a follow-up interview, Kelly did admit that her marriage to Doug had been rocky, and she did confess to a past relationship with Greg during one of their separations. She also claimed that Greg had once threatened to kill Doug out of jealousy, trying to shift blame his way. But still, police suspected Kelly wasn't just an innocent bystander. At first, Greg told police that he had an alibi, that he was home that entire night. A roommate even backed him up, but not for long. The roommate later recanted, saying Greg did in fact leave that night and didn't return until the very next morning. And that was the break that investigators needed. Phone records show that Kelly and Greg had been in constant communication leading up to Doug's murder. 47 calls in total, with Kelly initiating nearly half of them. This directly contradicted her claim that Greg was just harassing her. Under pressure, Greg agreed to a plea deal, life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. But only if he testified against Kelly. And that's when Greg confessed to everything. He said that Kelly had planned Doug's murder from the entire beginning. She convinced Doug to buy a house and recommit to their marriage, all while secretly plotting his death so she could benefit from his $10,000 life insurance policy, as well as the $84,000 house that she had shared with him. And Greg claims that when he asked her why she should just not divorce him, Kelly allegedly replied, "He'll never leave me alone." And according to Greg, Kelly picked him up, gave him a nightstick and knife, and let him into the house while Doug was still out with his friends. That's when she went out with friends to build a credible alibi. Then, when Doug came home around 11 p.m. that night, Greg supposedly ambushed him, forced him into his car, and drove him all the way to a wooded area on Luke Edwards Road, a spot that Kelly had picked out. And it's there Greg beat and stabbed Doug, took his wedding ring and watch to stage a robbery, and left him there to die. Later, Kelly met him at the scene, climbed the embankment to view Doug's body, then handed Greg kerosene to torch the car. Afterward, they made calls from separate payphones to appear unconnected and agreed to stay away from one another. It was now clear Doug's murder wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. And according to Greg, Kelly was the mastermind. And at the time of Doug's murder, Kelly was only 28 and her husband was 30. On February 25th, Kelly Gissendaner was arrested for orchestrating the murder of her husband, Doug. That night, she told police an entirely new version of events, claiming Greg had confessed the murder to her and threatened to harm her and her children if she went to the police. But investigators weren't buying it. She was charged with murder, felony murder, and possession of a knife during a felony. Despite facing the death penalty, Kelly rejected a plea deal similar to Greg's, life with parole after 25 years. And then her trial began on November 2nd, 1998. Greg Owen was the prosecution's star witness. His courtroom testimony largely matched his earlier confession, though some details have changed. He now claimed Kelly was with him during the murder and that she handed him a bottle of kerosene from the car rather than burning Doug's car with him. Greg testified that Kelly wanted Doug dead to keep the house and benefit from his life insurance, and that she believed murder was the only way to get rid of him. Another damaging witness was Laura McDuffie, a fellow inmate who testified that Kelly offered 10 grand to find someone willing to falsely confess to the murder. According to Laura, Kelly supposedly gave her a map of the house and a handwritten script of what to say in court. And then a handwriting expert confirmed that Kelly indeed had wrote the note. Even Kelly's own friends and Doug's father testified against her. One friend said that Kelly called her after the arrest and admitted that I did it, later calling again to claim that Greg had forced her to say that. Kelly's defense attorney, Edwin Wilson, argued the state hadn't proven her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He questioned Greg's credibility, noting that Doug, a trained Army veteran, wouldn't likely allow a smaller man to control and abduct him. He also tried to discredit Laura McDuffie as a manipulative inmate seeking a reduced prison time and claimed Kelly's friends simply misheard what she had said on the phone. But the jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they found Kelly guilty of orchestrating her husband's murder, even if she didn't physically commit it. Her sentence: death. We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that statutory aggravating circumstances do exist in this case. We fix the sentence of death. While awaiting her execution, Kelly Gissendaner was held at the Arundel State Prison, most of the time isolated alone in her cell. After her conviction, she became the only woman on Georgia's death row, one of 84 death row inmates, and the first woman the state had sentenced to death in 70 years, the first since Lena Baker in 1945, whose devastating story you can also find on this channel. Kelly filed a motion for a new trial in December 1998, but it was denied. Over the next 17 years, her execution would be delayed multiple times. Originally scheduled for February 25th, 2015, her first execution was postponed due to severe weather. A second attempt was supposed to be in March of that year, but that was also called off just hours before the execution when the drugs that were being used during the execution appeared cloudy, raising concerns about the drug's safety and effectiveness. Her lawyers filed a complaint arguing the back and forth violated her protection against cruel and unusual punishment, but that claim was dismissed. But all those delays couldn't last forever. On September 29, 2015, at 12:30 a.m. in the morning, Kelly Renee Gissendaner was executed by lethal injection. She was 47 years old, the first woman executed in the state of Georgia in over 7 decades, and notably, the first person in at least 40 years the state put to death without being the one who physically committed the murder. Her final meal reflected simple Southern comforts: cornbread, buttermilk, 2 Burger King Whoppers with cheese, fries, ice cream, popcorn, and a salad with Paul Newman buttermilk dressing. But it was her final moments that left the deepest impression. Strapped to the gurney, her arms at her sides, IVs already in place, Kelly looked calm. Media witnesses entered as the chaplain finished praying. At peace, Kelly began to sing Amazing Grace. Her voice, described as joyful and full of light, faltered only as the drug started to take hold. 10 minutes later, she was gone. Before the end, she whispered to her attorney, "I love you, Susan. You let my kids know I went out singing Amazing Grace."
And I love you, Sally. And I love you, Susan. You let my kids know I went out singing an amazing grace. And tell the Gissendaner family, I am so sorry that amazing man lost his life because of me. And if I could take it back, if this would change it, I would have done it a long time ago. But it's not. And I just hope they find peace. And I hope they find some happiness. God bless you.
This moment, her final act of grace and acceptance, marked a profound turning point in Kelly's story. It was the culmination of a transformation that began years earlier behind prison walls. The journey of a woman who, in facing death, found faith.
She began sobbing, then crying, then sobbing, and then she made a statement apologizing to an amazing man that lost his life because of her. Also spoke of loved her attorney, Susan Casey, and her children, hoped that they would find peace. And she then began to sing two gospel songs, one Amazing Grace, the other was Indecipherable.
Kelly's story made national headlines, not just because of the crime itself, but because of the outpouring of support that she received in the final days and years leading up to her execution. Many people came forward to say that although Kelly had conspired to murder her then husband and did play a significant role in planning his death, that she still didn't deserve to die. These supporters believed that she had changed. While incarcerated, Kelly found religion, embraced Christian values, and became a model inmate. She inspired others and was credited with positively impacting countless lives behind bars. Among those who spoke out in her defense were some of the most unexpected voices: her own children. In the days before her execution, courts were flooded with filings and supporters pleading for her mercy. Her transformation behind bars led many to ask, should we still execute someone who has clearly been rehabilitated? If good behavior and personal reform are considered in granting parole or reducing sentences, why isn't that same logic applied to those on death row? No one was saying Kelly should walk free, but couldn't she have been allowed to live out her remaining years in prison, dying naturally from age or illness rather than by lethal injection? Especially considering that she received a harsher sentence than the person who actually carried out the murder. Was this about sending a message that women can be put on death row too? Was Kelly being made an example of? Did the punishment truly fit the crime? Even if you believe it did, we have to ask, isn't the purpose of prison to rehabilitate, to create better people? And if that's what happened to Kelly, what does it mean when we ignore it? Support for Kelly came from all across the spectrum: former prison officials, inmates, and even global religious leaders, even local leaders in the religious community. Many who knew her during her time behind bars, who believed she had undergone a profound transformation and no longer resembled the woman who once orchestrated her own husband's murder. Vanessa O'Donnell, a former state corrections deputy director and Kelly's warden from 2001 to 2004, urged the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles to grant her clemency. She cited Kelly's exceptional prison behavior, deep remorse, the lesser sentence of her co-defendant, and the very pleas from her own children. She described Kelly as someone who reached out to other inmates in despair, helping them find self-worth and hope, a kind of guidance no one else could offer. Even current and former inmates rallied for her, calling themselves struggle sisters. They credited Kelly with giving them hope, ministering to them through air vents, and lifting them during their lowest point. One inmate, Carla J. Simmons, recalled the entire prison community emotionally gathering around a TV when Kelly's first execution was halted. Despite being held in segregation, Kelly stayed connected, offering counsel and friendship through walls and fences. She became a beloved figure known for her warmth, strength, and willingness to serve, even cutting grass or dancing in Christmas performances.
We have a group of women that were incarcerated with Kelly. At least 200 have spoke out on how Kelly has touched them, helped them, keeping them from killing themselves.
The first time I met Kelly, I was on suicide watch at Metro State Prison in the lockdown unit. I wanted to die. I'd cut my wrists, and the 4 part of my arm. Kelly, not knowing me at the time personally, spoke to me through an air vent and said, "You will live and you're gonna do great things."
I've spent, out of about 15 years, I'm gonna say I spent at least 5.5 years of those literally in lockdown because I was so angry. I was depressed, and I always took it out on other people and took it out on myself. So I was a bad person. Like, I feel like I didn't deserve a chance to get out of prison because I hurt other people. She helped me to see that, my life wasn't over. I still had a chance. Here she is with a death sentence, and she thought nothing of herself or her time.
People knew who I was, and it kind of caused the problem. So the warden, she decided to put me in lockdown. Of course you feel like all hope is gone. And when I met Kelly, she just helped me lift my head up, and just through her words and her conversations and her drive and her motivation. Without her, I probably wouldn't have made it mentally.
She would read quotes from the Bible and tell me that, God loved me regardless.
Kelly Gissendaner is one who deserves to live. She deserves to live because she helped other people live. She helped other people grow. She helped other people realize their gifts, their talents. I would do the rest of my time in prison in exchange for her life. That's how great a person she is. She deserves to live.
Chaplains who knew her described a dramatic personal shift from a selfish, guarded woman to someone guided by faith, humility, and compassion.
Kelly, when I first met her, she was beginning to evolve. The person that she was when she committed her crime was not the person that I had encountered.
The two became close over the years and would write all the time, and Della would visit throughout the year. She says they became like sisters. Through the years, she says Kelly Gissendaner was a completely different person, ministering to other women in the prison and making amends with her children who no longer had a father because of her.
They were able to reconcile and come together, and her oldest son, he finally stood up for her on her final day at the clemency hearing, because at the first hearing, he was not there.
While in prison, Kelly earned a theology certificate through a program sponsored by Emory University's Candler School of Theology. Faculty and students there considered her one of their own, deeply moved by her spiritual growth and the impact that she had on so many others. In her clemency petition, Kelly wrote this: "I will never understand how I let myself fall into such evil, but I have learned firsthand that no one, not even me, is beyond redemption through God's grace and mercy." Jan Love, the Dean and Professor of Christianity and World Politics at Emory University, said Kelly turned her life in a radically new direction and has benefited many, many people. This is a good illustration of an extraordinary talented woman who sank into a very dark place and did some really horrible things. But it is just as poignant and an illustration of God's redemptive work in the world, the Christianity professor said. Support for Kelly extended far beyond prison walls. Faith communities across the country, including the United Methodist Church, prayed for her. Even Pope Francis appealed to the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles, asking for her life to be spared, not to erase her crime, but to offer a sentence that honored both justice and mercy. While not wishing to minimize the gravity of the crime for which Ms. Gissendaner has been convicted, and while sympathizing with the victims, I nonetheless implore you, in consideration of the reasons that have been presented to your board, to commute the sentence to one that would better express both justice and mercy, the letter from the Pope read. Since finding Christianity during her time in prison, many believe that Kelly Gissendaner's faith should have factored into her sentence, that her spiritual transformation was reason enough to commute her death penalty. According to the social principles of the United Methodist Church, the denomination condemns torture of persons by governments for any purpose and explicitly opposes capital punishment.
I have this very vivid memory of the first time I met Kelly, because it was in the classroom in the women's prison. We read Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, that redemption only happens when we turn to our painful memories and face them and bring them into the present. My relationship with Kelly has affected my relationship with Jesus. I now take Matthew 25 literally when Jesus says, "Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me."
For Reverend Ben Gosden, pastor of Aldersgate United Methodist Church in Savannah, Georgia, Kelly's case embodied those principles in real life. This is a story about systematic injustice, he said. We claim that our correctional system is meant to be a source of restorative justice. And here is this profound example of someone who has been restored, who's willing to spend the rest of her life in prison. So why are we insisting on killing her? He described Kelly as someone whose religious writings was among the most powerful that he has ever read, not just in content, but in her ability to connect it to her lived experience. This is the unexpected story of a woman who met Jesus and said, "Okay, I will carry the cross." Whether she was mentoring troubled inmates or comforting women on suicide watch, Kelly became a source of peace, mercy, and love. The Reverend added that Kelly was living out her ministry in ways that many of us, comfortable in our privileged and busy lives, never find the time or courage to do. After her execution, Archbishop Gregory expressed sorrow, not just for the loss of another life, but for a justice system still reliant on capital punishment in the first place. He, like so many others, hoped Georgia would one day choose mercy over death. Sorrow. We feel sorrow that another individual's life has been taken. Sorrow that another family has suffered the loss of a loved one. Sorrow that our nation continues to feel that it must impose this type of penalty. But we also feel hope that other jurisdictions will remove the death penalty. 19 states thus far have removed the death penalty. We certainly would hope that Georgia would consider that as a reasonable and merciful option. But perhaps the most powerful and unexpected voices advocating for Kelly Gissendaner came from those closest to the pain that she caused, her own children. It took years for Kelly to rebuild a relationship with her kids after orchestrating the murder of their own father. Obviously, the trauma was deep, the betrayal unimaginable, and yet, over time, her children forgave her. They didn't excuse what she had done, but they saw that the woman who sat on death row for 18 years was not the same woman who had once plotted such a terrible act. And her daughter Kayla actually became one of her most vocal supporters. Kayla told the board that her father would not have wanted her mom to be executed, even after the fact. Kayla explained how she had to face the full weight of her mother's actions, confront the anger, and work through all the pain. But in doing so, she witnessed her mother's transformation. A woman who struggled for years to come to grips with what she had done and who had grown through faith, remorse, and a desire to help others. My father's death was extremely painful for many people, but I've recently concluded that in many ways, I was the person most impacted by his murder. The impact of losing my mother would be devastating. I can't fathom losing another parent. But Kelly's children didn't just speak out. They took action. They advocated for her clemency, joined by more than 90,000 people who signed a petition urging the governor to halt the execution altogether. The petition called Kelly a powerful voice for good, someone who had become a pastoral presence to fellow inmates, teaching, preaching, and offering them hope. Kelly's attorneys also submitted a powerful statement from former Georgia Supreme Court Chief Justice Norman Fletcher. And he argued that her sentence was fundamentally disproportionate, especially considering that Greg Owen, the man who actually carried out the murder, only received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Fletcher noted that since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976, Georgia had not executed anyone who didn't directly commit the killing. The petition supporting the clemency stated this: Kelly is a living testament to the possibility of change and the power of hope. She is an extraordinary example of the rehabilitation that the correction system aims to produce. That wasn't just legal rhetoric. Dozens of women who served time alongside Kelly, many of them incarcerated as teenagers themselves, came forward with their own stories. They spoke of how Kelly counseled them through their darkest moments when they felt scared, hopeless, or on the verge of giving up. Inside the prison walls, Kelly had become a quiet force of strength, a mentor, a source of peace, a beacon of compassion in a place meant only for punishment. And in her final moments, her children faced an agonizing decision. The parole board gave them a choice. visit their mother one last time, or use that time to make one final plea for her life. And they chose to fight. We chose to try and save her life, and they still denied us, Kelly said outside the prison that rainy night as over 100 people gathered in silent protest. But not everyone believed Kelly deserved mercy. Doug's parents, who still obviously grieving the loss of their son, had fought just as hard to ensure that Kelly's sentence was indeed carried out. In their eyes, justice was clear and irreversible. Kelly planned and executed Doug's murder. She targeted him, and his death was intentional. She had no mercy, gave him no rights, no choices, nor the opportunity to live his life. His life was not hers to take. Their pain was just as real, just as enduring. And it's this tension, the complexity of grief, justice, redemption, that makes Kelly's story so difficult and so human. Her children believed prison had done what it was supposed to, not just punish, but reform. That the woman they came to know and love again had become someone worthy of a second chance, someone who did in fact change. But in the end, no amount of pleas, petitions, or public outcry, even the involvement of Pope Francis himself, was enough to sway the board. As we know, Kelly Gissendaner was executed, and yet her legacy lives on in the lives who she touched, from fellow inmates to religious leaders to Christians all over the world, to her very own community, to her own children who found a way to forgive her. Yes, Kelly committed a heinous crime, she admitted it, and she took full accountability and responsibility. But she also changed. She grew, and along the way, she became a source of hope for others, especially those who felt lost within the prison system. So the question remains, do those years of positive impact count for something? Anything at all? Especially when she wasn't the one who, in fact, carried out the killing in the first place. And maybe that's the hardest question of all. If prison can change a person, if someone can truly transform, shouldn't we make space for that change to matter? What do you think about this case? Was justice truly served? Should Kelly Gissendaner have been executed for her role in her husband's death? Or should she have been granted mercy, allowed the grace to grow old behind bars, continuing to counsel, guide, and uplift others? How many more lives might she have touched had she been allowed to live? If ever there was a story that embodied true personal reform, by all accounts, it was Kelly's. And isn't that what we say prison is supposed to be about? Rehabilitation, redemption? At least we say that's the goal. Kelly was born into chaos, abuse, instability, and violence. She learned early that survival meant yelling, fighting, and shutting down. No one is denying what she did. She committed the ultimate betrayal. She plotted the death of her own husband, the father of her children, and for that, the state took her life. No one here is forgetting Doug Gissendaner. His life mattered. His loss was painful. He had family as well, he had friends, and he had kids. People who loved him, and maybe, just maybe, he would have wanted the harshest penalty for the woman who betrayed him. But his children, their children, don't think so. Behind bars, Kelly found something she never had before: faith, peace, accountability, purpose. She gave love and guidance to women who had never known either. She became a light in one of the darkest places. And if we really believe that everything happens for a reason, then maybe prison was her reason, her crucible, her transformation. Because without it, maybe she never would have changed. And if she changed the lives of dozens, or even hundreds, shouldn't those lives matter too? Shouldn't they count for something just as much as the life she helped take? There's no perfect answer here, just questions that linger long after the headlines fade. The final judgment may have been carried out, but Kelly Gissendaner's story, well, it's far from over.